Hi everyone, hope you're doing good. Welcome back to another genre comparison episode. Now in this episode we're going to be comparing hard rock and blues rock with instrumental and experimental rock. Now this is the 8th episode in the series. Go check out the other episodes if you missed any or if you're interested in checking any more out. The reason why I put blues rock and hard rock and experimental instrumental rock together is because there's a lot of overlap and they're really similar. So, I just thought it'd be easier to put them all together, make the video a bit better as well. So yeah, before we get into the video, if you're new and you like my content, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Go drop a like on the video if you go on to like the video. Please share with anyone you think might like my content. All feedback's massively appreciated as well. And a massive thank you to everyone who has already subscribed and for watching, commenting. It's really massively appreciated. And also let me know if you've been enjoying this series, if you like watching these videos, if you want me to carry on with it and do more episodes in the future. So yeah, now let's get straight into the episode. So we're going to start with blues rock. It first came to be in the mid to late 1960s, being influenced and combining the early sound of rock music with blues music. Rock and roll, electric blues and 60s pop rock are the main influences for the genre's creation. The origins are in the United Kingdom and the US. Traits include loud distorted electric guitars, bluesy improvisation, extended jams, extended guitar solos, heavy power chord riffing, complex bass lines, simple drum techniques. 12 and 16 bar blues progressions are also used. Keyboards are sometimes used in music as well. The songs are normally in a major key, but some are in a minor key. Some vocalists would also play a harmonica or extra percussion just to add extra stuff to the music. Lyrical themes are pretty similar to those of blues and 60s rock style lyrics. In the late 60s, bands that adopted the blues rock style include the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, Fleetwood Mac and Jeff Beck. Then it developed throughout the 70s with bands such as Led Zeppelin, Johnny Winter, Dr. Feelgood, Rory Gallagher, Aerosmith, their early stuff, Lynyrd Skynyrd and ZZ Top. After this, the most notable artists that adopted a blues rock style in their music include Stevie Ray Vaughan, Gary Moore and Joe Bonamassa. After the 60s, blues rock and more rock music as a whole evolved into many different subgenres. The main ones include southern rock, psychedelic rock, prog rock, punk rock, early heavy metal and most notably hard rock. Hard rock first came to be in the 1970s, however the origins began in the 60s. It was massively influenced by psychedelic rock, garage rock, rock and roll and blues rock, with the latter being the most intertwined with hard rock. The origins are again in the UK and the US. Traits and lyrical themes are very similar to blues rock. Vocal styles are a little bit more aggressive than in blues rock, slightly more complex and heavier guitar riffing as well. Some bands also use some keyboards. The term hard rock first came to be in the late 60s, early hard rock bands being influenced by bands I've already mentioned. But also bands such as the Beatles, the Kinks, the Who, Blue Cheer and Iron Butterfly. The most notable hard rock bands, or now classic rock bands from the 70s include Deep Purple, Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath, Rainbow, Kiss, Queen, Blue Oyster Cult, Rush, AC/DC and Thin Lizzy, amongst many others. In the 80s, hard rock evolved in what was known as glam metal. Bands took the hard rock sound and fused it with glam rock and early heavy metal. Most notable bands here include Motley Crue, Rat, Poison and Twisted Sister. There were also other hard rock bands that emerged in the 80s. These include Van Halen, Cinderella, Wasp, Guns N' Roses, Extreme, Whitesnake and Skid Row. After this, in the 90s, the genre took a little bit of a decline, mainly due to the new evolution of rock music known as grunge. Bands such as Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam took over the mainstream. In the 2000s, the genre had a small revival and new bands come through, continuing the legacy. The genre has also evolved into many different subgenres over this time. The main subgenres include alternative rock, punk rock, Britpop, post-grunge and post-punk. Now we're going to move on to experimental rock. That first came to be again in the late 1960s, being influenced by a wide range of music and innovation of artists around that time. It's sometimes known as avant rock, inventing the avant-garde genre. It pushes the boundaries of music to its absolute fullest, and the origins of the genre are in the United States. Traits include odd instrumentation, opaque lyrics, or sometimes even instrumentals, unorthodox structures and rhythms, multi-tracking and musical innovation. Bands usually had an underlying rejection of commercial aspirations, and lyrical themes would be really similar to other styles of rock music, similar topics, but they'd also incorporate progressive rock style lyrics such as poetry and things like that. The early sound of experimental rock is very close to the sound of progressive rock and psychedelic rock. Pioneers of those genres are credited to have paved the way for experimental rock in the 70s. The most notable bands of experimental rock include Mothers of Invasion, Velvet Underground, The Fugs and Frank Zappa. After this, the genre evolved into many different subgenres, the most notable including krautrock, noise rock, art rock, neo-psychedelia, post-punk, no-wave, avant-garde metal and post-rock. Also, experimental rock can be found in a lot of instrumental rock music. And lastly, we're going to look at a brief history of instrumental rock. Now, this first came to be in the 1950s and 60s, combining all forms of rock music with instrumental music. There is very little to no vocals in the music. Some bands tend to make instrumental compositions for their albums. Some even have instrumental intros, outros or intervals. However, some make a whole album of instrumental songs. Origins are in the United States. Traits include rock-style rhythms and structures, complex instrumentation, melodic leads throughout the song, and sometimes virtuosic guitar playing. The beginnings of the genre spawned from instrumental jazz and blues songs, combining that with 60s rock songs. Surf music was also a massive sort of thing for instrumental music. The Ventures, the Shadows and Dick Dale being the most prominent part in the surf music movement. The Fleetwood Mac song Albatross was also massive for the future of instrumental rock music. After this, in the 70s, many rock bands, mainly prog rock bands, wrote instrumental songs for their albums. It became a pretty big part of rock music, especially after Mike Oldfield's album Tubular Bells, which could be considered the first ever full proper instrumental rock album. However, it was in the 80s and early 90s where instrumental rock fully rose, with many virtuoso guitarists taking the genre up to that next level. The most notable guitarists include Joe Satriani, Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, Tony McAlpine, Kane Roberts, Pepe Gomez, Marty Friedman and Jason Becker with Cacophony, and Michelangelo Batio. Also, many metal bands in the 80s and 90s composed a lot of instrumental songs on their albums, and some indie and post-rock bands started using some instrumental rock in their music as well. In the 2000s, many more virtuosic guitarists started releasing instrumental rock albums, including Marty Friedman, Paul Gilbert, Steve Morse, Jeff Loomis, John Five, Guthrie Govan, Steve Stevens, Kiko Loureiro, and John Petrucci. There were also a lot more post-rock bands writing instrumental rock songs for their albums. Lastly, the first instrumental metal band was created in the 2000s. The band in question is called Animals as Leaders. They combine progressive metal with instrumental rock and also being influenced by virtuosic guitar instrumental rock albums. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the similarities and differences, starting with the similarities. The genres all began around the same time, sort of in that mid to late 60s, early 70s, where they really started to really thrive and expand out. They were all influenced by similar music and bands. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to keep repeating that, because it was just got boring. But yeah, they're all influenced by a lot of blues artists and the 60s rock bands. Instrumentation's very similar. Yeah, they all use guitars, bass, drums, sometimes keyboards. It's all pretty similar. Lyrical themes, if used, are pretty much the same. They all have the same sort of lyrical themes throughout each of these genres. Structure and riffing wise are pretty similar. In terms of blues progressions, power chord riffing and stuff like that, they all sort of refer back to that style and structure. Guitar is the lead instrument. Yeah, the guitar is the lead instrument in rock music. It's obvious. Yeah, quite a lot of bands play a lot of long extended guitar solos. Sometimes there's keyboard solos, but not that many. And both influenced a wider range of rock and metal music, however in different ways. So yeah, it's just massive rock music. Now we're going to move on to the differences. There's very little to no vocals in instrumental and experimental rock. That's pretty obvious because it's called instrumental rock. But yeah, in experimental rock there isn't that many vocals either. Instrumental and experimental rock push the boundaries more than blues and hard rock, which I think is true, because experimental rock and instrumental rock, they use more from other genres. They take bits from jazz, classical music, even like other styles of music, funk even as well, stuff like that. Whereas blues and hard rock sort of just stay in that bluesy sort of rockabilly sort of way. Levels of success pretty different. Yeah, the blues and hard rock stuff in the 70s and the 80s were everywhere. It was absolutely massive. And the instrumental rock stuff, even though it hit its peak in the 80s and starting, in the 2000s, it had a bit more success, but nowhere near the level of success as them hard rock bands in the 70s and the 80s. And lastly, experimental rock, instrumental rock is more complex. There's more complex riffing, solos, progressions going on. They just put more in their music, and yeah, they just expand upon what blues and hard rock does and sort of takes it up to 11 basically. Now we're just going to end with my final thoughts on these genres. Blues and hard rock hold a very special place for me. It's what I was massively into as a teen, and I still enjoy it now. I really love the 70s and 80s rock bands. There's still quite a few I need to have a listen to. But for me, Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Gary Moore, AC/DC were absolutely massive for me when I was first learning guitar. The influence that these bands had on the future of rock and metal music is unmatched for me. Without any of that stuff, without any of their movements, we wouldn't have what we have today, and for that they earn my utmost respect. And as for experimental instrumental rock, I absolutely love it. The innovation and the technicality is just absolutely, it's beyond belief. They're not afraid to cross genres and mix things together and try new stuff out. And I think that's really, really cool as an artist. I know some people are not into instrumental music, and you know that's totally fair enough. But for me as a guitarist, I haven't been influenced by anything more than guitarists such as Joe Satriani, Marty Friedman, and Yngwie Malmsteen, people like that. And yeah, just instrumental rock as a whole. They inspired me to make my own solo project and have it all instrumental and mixing different genres together. Also, the influence that they had on like guitar YouTubers like Stevie T, Jared Dines is pretty apparent. They always talk about them kind of guitarists being massive influences to them, and in turn, the YouTubers are a massive influence on me as well. So yeah, these genres will always be two of my favourite genres of rock. So that was this video. I'd love to know what you think of any of these genres. Did I miss anything out in this video? And of course, if you'd like to see more of these genre comparison videos, because this might be the last one, if people are not that bothered, I probably would just call it quits here and move on to other stuff, what people would want to see instead. But yeah, if you got this far, thanks ever so much for watching, and until the next time, keep rocking.